Wes for Poker for Pound Pups, vlog 14 coming at you. Happy December. We have officially moved to Seattle, so as you can see, new office. We've gotten a few sessions of poker under our belts. Washington poker is a little bit different. Since I've been on a little bit of a downswing lately, and since there are a little bit different rules and a new environment, I decided I would start at 1-3 for my first few sessions. So today we'll be covering the first two sessions I played in Washington at Fortune Poker Club in Renton. This vlog will cover both of those first two nights, so we'll go over all of those filmed and unfilmed hands that are noteworthy. The last video put out was decent quality, but for whatever reason, hardly anybody watched it. So whether you're a subscriber or not, make sure you hit that bell icon so that you're notified when these videos come out. It defeats the purpose to put these vlogs out if nobody's gonna watch them. So just hit that bell icon so that you're notified when we release something. This episode will be 1-3 only, but future episodes will likely include 3-5 or maybe a combination of 1-3 and 3-5. One thing of note during both of these sessions is that there's a high hand payout. So for every half hour, the top hand and then the second best hand both make money. The best hand makes $400, the second best hand makes $200, so people are incentivized to try and chase getting, a really strong full house, a straight flush, or a four of a kind. So that will come into play for a few of these hands. I don't know about you, but I always get pregame jitters the first time I'm playing at a new establishment. Let's see how Fortune Poker does for us. Ace-Jack offsuit, one limper. I make it 15 to go and get called by the big blind and under the gun +2. So we're going three ways in position to a flop of Jack 10-4 rainbow. Feeling pretty good. So when it checks to me, I bet $20. The big blind calls and under the gun +2 folds. The turn is the queen of clubs. I don't love it, but when it checks to me, I'm still going to have the best hand here a lot of the time. I make it 35 and the big blind calls again. The river is the 10 of spades. Now I think about what I beat that's going to call me on a third street, and there really isn't much. If he was calling me with second pair, he's now beating me. If he had some sort of straight draw and he missed, and I bet he's just going to fold. A lot of the straight draws out there are going to include a queen in them, and they're ahead of me. So really, unless he just happened to have one of the other two jacks out there, I don't see much merit in betting. I check it back. And it's a good thing we did because the big blind shows king, queen. He flopped an open-ended straight draw with two overcards. He got there on the turn. We chipped down $70 on our first hand of the session. Next playable hand is king, jack of clubs from the small blind. Under the gun limps. It makes it to me. I'm, of course, going to bet this. I bump it up to $20. Under the gun calls, and we go heads up to a flop of queen 10-3. So we flop open-ended. I'm going to bet this. I make it 20 to go, and under the gun calls. A pot of $80, and we go to the turn of the 9 of clubs. We bink the nut straight. I'm going to go ahead and bet this again. I make it half pot. I put $40 in there, and music to our ears. Under the gun announces he is all in for another 93. We, of course, snap call. He shows queen 9 off, expecting it to be good. I'm sorry, my friend. Queen 9 is no good. The river's a 7, and we scoop a $346 pot. We are now in the black in Washington poker, and damn, it feels good. I've been super card dead for a while, so I make the mistake of getting undisciplined and playing king 10 offsuit. I make it 15 to go. The low jack calls. She's been a calling station to this point. And we go to a flop of king 9-8 with two spades. This is a wet board. I probably should either check or just go big on this. Instead, I probably make the worst play as I bet small, which is just going to keep her in with everything and really not give me much information whatsoever. I make it 12, she calls, and we go to the turn of the 4 of clubs. It looks like a brick to me. I make it 25 this time, and once again, she calls. So I think it's likely that she's either got a weaker king, another pair, or maybe even some sort of draw. I don't love it. I check dark, and the river is another 8. She decides to go all in. I take a look at her stack. It looks like about $60. I hem and I haw. I go back and forth. At the end of the day, we've got top pair. It's a little bit under-repped, and there are quite a few draws that have missed. I stick in the call, and she shows me 8-6 of clubs. That's what I get for playing this horrible hand the way that I did. It turns out that she was all in for $82, something that if I had known and asked for a count, I probably would have folded. I don't know about you, but I've never had a perfect poker session, and this was definitely one of the low points of this first session in Washington. So I chipped down 135 bucks on that hand, and I looked down at ace nine offsuit. When I was being disciplined and making the right plays, they were folds. So because of it, and because of the hand variance that I'd gotten, I must have just looked super tight. I wanted to play some hands, so I stuck in a $6 straddle, two callers from under the gun, plus one, and the low jack. I go ahead and check my option, and we go to a flop of ace king deuce with three hearts. I check, under the gun plus one checks, and the low jack bets $10. I've got top pair, I've got a draw, I go ahead and call. Under the gun plus one folds, and we go to the turn of the five of spades. I check again, low jack fires out for 20, I go ahead and call again. The river is the four of clubs, so any of these hands with a single heart in it are now no good. I've got top pair, so I'm actually feeling pretty good until the low jack decides to just go ahead and rip it all in for 251. What? This makes no sense. If the low jack had a flush, why go so big? And if the low jack missed, I almost feel like this is just a bad risk reward ratio. So I seriously considered just sticking in the call with my top pair. After much thought, I just don't think I can call this for a $78 pot. I need to be good here 35, 40% of the time. I fold, I tell my opponent, show a bluff, and he shows the nut flush. Well, I'm glad I got out of the way. His overbet almost worked, but we successfully dodged that bullet and save ourselves some money for the next hand. I decided to limp and set mine with pocket fives from either under the gun or under the gun plus one. It folds around, somebody in the blinds goes ahead and sticks around, and we go to the flop of Jack 9-6 with two hearts. Pretty uneventful. Maybe I'm ahead, maybe I'm not, but there's no merit to betting. So when he checks, I check it back. The turn's a queen of clubs, even worse for us now. So when he checks, I check it back again. And just before I turn my camera off, the river comes in the five of clubs. We bink bottom set. The big blind now leads into me for a bet of $10. I've got a set. I'm definitely under repped, so I bump it up to 26. The big blind takes a second and three bets to 85 bucks. A minute ago, we had an $8 pot, and now this has escalated to where he's three betting me on the river at 85. I think about it for a sec, and I just don't see him doing this with anything worse than what I have. So I just go ahead and toss my set away. I fold. I think either he's got a better set or he's got a straight. We only lose 29 bucks. I think this is one of my better plays of the night. I got to the river, I hit a set, I raised for value, and then when I faced aggression, I got out of the way. I never found out what he had, but I think this was a good fold. A couple limpers, I'm in the big blind with ace of clubs, queen of clubs. I go ahead and raise it to $17. The button calls, and we are going heads up to a flop of ace 7-7 rainbow. Obviously, I'm losing to any seven, but other than that, I think I'm going to be in good shape much of the time. My opponent on the button has been an action player, and he is incentivized to play a wide variety of hands considering his position. So I c-bet for 15, and he puts in the min raise to $30. I'm not sure if he's just fast playing a seven or if he's trying to put me to the test because there's an ace out there and he knows I'm going to c-bet this flop, but I go ahead and stick in the call. Going to the turn of the jack of clubs, I think this card's going to help me more often than it's going to help him. I check, and the button bets for $40. I just get the feeling that he's up to no good and that I've got the best hand here. So I kind of do an old school 2000s raise to find out where I'm at. I check raise to 120. He thinks about it for a few seconds and ultimately folds. I'm not sure if I like this play or not, but it worked out. We're $90 richer, and we've got some positive momentum moving on to the next hand. We are in the big blind, and the same player from before, who's been pretty splashy, raises to $10 from the hijack. Two other players call, and when it gets to me, I bump it up to 55. The initial raiser folds, as does the button. The small blind sticks in the call, and we're going heads up in position to a flop of 10-6-3 rainbow. The small blind checks. I see bet to 60, ready to just go ahead and rip it in on the turn. The small blind thinks it over for a second, folds, says all he had was a bad 10. I let him know his 10 was good, but we will take it. Back-to-back winning hands, and things are about to get better. Glad we've finally shed that image of playing super tight, because we look down at the best hand in poker, black pocket aces. I raise to $15 and get called by the cutoff, the button, and the small blind, and we are going 4 ways to a flop with the ace of hearts in the window. Ace, queen, 4, we've got top set. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the high hand is in effect. So if I'm able to get a full house with the aces full, there's a great chance I make at least 200, if not 400 additional dollars. There is a flush draw out there, but I'm going to be way ahead. So I really would like to see another card, even though we're multi-way. It checks to me, I check, and the cutoff does us a favor and bets $25. The button gets out of the way. The small blind, who's our splashy action player, makes the call, and I put in the call as well. 3 ways to the turn of the 9 of clubs. Checks to me, I'm still hoping that the board will pair. I think if I lead out, that's pretty strong and pretty telling. So I'm hoping that the cutoff will keep his story going when I check, but he checks it back. We go to the river, which isn't what we wanted, but it's also not dreadful. It's the 7 of spades. So there are no straights out there. There are no flushes out there. And we've got the nuts. And our splashy action player in the small blind bets into us and puts $100 into the middle. I've got 217 left in my stack. I think there's only one play here. I go ahead and rip it all in. The cutoff snap folds. The small blind thinks about it for a few seconds before ultimately tossing in a chip. I show my bullets, and they're good. The small blind looks disgusted. We don't care. We're scooping a pot of $569. And all of a sudden, we've climbed out of the hole, overcome a night where we've had to fold after fold after fold, and we are up. Last hand of this first night, and we've got ace-10 offsuit. We bump it up to 15 and get called by the hijack and the small blind. We go to a flop of 10-9 deuce with 2 clubs. I'm going to bet for protection here as I've got top pair, top kicker, but I'm super vulnerable. There's a flush draw out there. There's a straight draw out there. So I make it 21 to go. The hijack calls and the small blind check raises me to 105. This is our action splashy opponent who we've gone up against in the last few hands. I think about it for a few seconds, and I think if I was in the hole stuck, I'd probably go ahead and make the call here. But because we've battled back to get up, I'm just not in the mood to go ahead and give it up on a single pair holding. I make the uber tight fold, and the hijack sticks in the call for less. He's now all in, so at least I get to figure out what people had. They show their hands. The hijack shows that he called this all in with pocket jacks. He just flat called my pre-flop raise of $15 with jacks, and the splashy player in the small blind check raised us with top 2 pair. He had 10-9, so I was in 3rd place despite having top pair, top kicker. The tight fold pays off. We only lose $41 in this hand, and 10-9 ultimately ends up getting a full house. We rack up, and after 5.5 hours, we were in for 400, out for 610 for a profit of $210. It was a grind, but it was a win. So night 1 went fine. We were card dead for super long, but we grinded, and ended up making a profit. That was cool. So we went back the very next night. Unfortunately, they sat us in seat 1, which, for those of you familiar with the poker table, is just a really bad seat for filming. You've got, a third of your view is covered by the dealer. You can't really see the cards unless you super tilt your camera. It's just a rough spot. So I really prefer to be either right in like seat 5 where we're seeing all the cards come out, or on the edges so that you can see everybody's hands. So anyway, we're in seat 1. I'm not filming until I'm able to get a seat change. There have been a few hands that we've raised pre-flop, a few that we took down, another one that we let go. But within 10 or 15 minutes, I probably had a pretty aggressive image just as a result of the cards that I was getting pre-flop and me playing it appropriately. So I end up on the big blind. I've got 5-3 of hearts. It folds around all the way to the small blind. And typically, because of the rake, it makes sense to just go ahead and chop the pot, which means both players throw their hands into the muck and get their blinds back. The house doesn't take anything. So in the long run, this is the norm for a lot of cash games for people to just go ahead and chop anytime it folds to just the blinds. So when it folds to the small blind, I peek my head around the dealer and I say, chop. The villain says nothing, doesn't even acknowledge that I've said anything, and just goes ahead and sticks in the call. He doesn't say, hey, can we check it down? He doesn't say, no, I never chop. He just ignores me and calls. Well, I've got 5-3 suited, so let's just see what happens. I check my option, and we go to a flop of ace-9-4 with 1 heart. So I've got a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight flush draw, and a gut shot. So when he checks, I'm happy to just go ahead and check it back. The turn brings in the 2 of spades, so at the moment, I've got the nuts. He checks, and I bet $6, happy to just take it down, but he goes ahead and sticks in the call. The turn is the 7 of diamonds. He checks. I bet $20 this time. Clearly an overbet, but I figure maybe he'll just think I'm being that aggressive kid that just sat at the table that's trying to run everybody over. Well, he doesn't like that very much, so after I make it 20, he bumps it up to 50. I slow down, I check the board, make sure I'm not missing anything. Are there any flushes out there? No. Are there any better straights out there? No. So we can't lose this hand. I realize it's a little bit ambitious, but I make it 150, and it takes him about a second and a half before he announces he is all in. I snap call, throw in a chip, and turn over my straight. He throws pocket aces down in disgust. So 15 minutes in, and we've cracked aces already. The reason the hand played out the way that it did is because this guy wanted to hit the high hand. He went ahead and flopped top set, and he figured, oh, let's just give myself a chance to get either a full house or quads, which is why he checked his option. But to me, you're losing money in the long run paying the rake for a very, very, very small chance at getting a high hand, which is only going to pay you $200 or $400, depending on if you even qualify for it. Anyway, I was happy to just chop, take my big blind back, or if he had said, hey, can we just check it down the whole way? I'm not going to say no. But since this guy was greedy, it bit him in the ass. He really should have just folded or called when I 3-bet him on the river. He probably just had tunnel vision once he hit that set of aces. And I'm sure my image as being an aggressive kid helped out as well. Nevertheless, a great start to the first hand as we profit his entire stack, which was $280, and we've doubled up within 15 minutes of sitting down. The next hand, about 15 minutes later, is also a doozy. I've got pocket eights in middle position, and I decide to go ahead and bump it up to $16. I get called from the player seated directly behind me in the low jack, as well as from somebody in the blinds. So we're going 3 ways to a flop of ace, 8, 6. We flop middle set. Obviously, this is a dynamic board with a flush draw out there, as well as a lot of middle cards. So the chances that somebody could improve to a flush or a straight are pretty high. And it's pretty likely that one of the 2 other players has at least 1 ace in their hand as well. So I'm not going to slow play this at all. But before I can figure out how much I'm going to bet, the big blind donk leads for $15. I figure this is probably a blocker bet, and he probably wants to see another card. I'm not sure though, but like I said, I'm not going to slow play this and just let everybody see one more card for 15 bucks. So I bump it up to 40. The low jack cold calls and the big blind calls as well. So we're still going 3 ways to a turn of the 9 of hearts, introducing a potential straight as well as 2 flush draws now in both spades and hearts. The big blind checks this time, and I think through my options, I'm only losing to 10-7 and 7-5 or pocket aces. I don't think any of those hands are likely the way that things have played out. So I'm going to go ahead and assume I've got the best hand with middle set. This time I'm going to size up and really charge those hands that are either on a spades draw or have an ace in their hand. I make it almost a pot size bet. I throw 150 into the middle, and the low jack calls again. The big blind looks shocked and he tanks for about a minute before folding his hand, so he must have had something serious as well. Considering that this was a single raise pot, I have middle set. There are 2 spades out there and there's an ace out there, and the low jack has called me down multiple times. I figure he's probably on spades. Now maybe he's just a non-believer and has another strong ace. Sometimes people will just call with ace king or ace queen pre-flop, so that's a possibility as well. But I'm going to assume it's more likely that he's on spades, which makes me think if I bet this river, if the spades come in, I'm just punting my money away. And if he misses and I bet, then he's just going to go ahead and fold. So I'm not sure if I like this play or not. Once the big blind folds on the turn, I check dark before the river comes out. The river comes the 2 of hearts. I think it's probably irrelevant, but it doesn't matter because the low jack immediately checks back. I turn over my pocket 8s and he turns over pocket 6s. We had set over set and failed to double up. I feel like I just misplayed this one miserably. If the spades don't come in, and I bet all in or maybe $100 or $200, I don't see him folding. I also think he lucked out that the big blind donk led, because I think that just showed how really strong that I was. Whereas if the big blind just checks on the flop and I put out a standard continuation bet, I think he's probably raising me on the flop with bottom set, assuming I've got ace king or ace queen and thinking he's going to be good here 8 or 9 times out of 10. So I think the big blind helped him out, and I think I royally screwed up by not making more money with set over set. We finally end up getting that seat change, so we move from seat 1 to seat 3. We've got a couple noteworthy hands before we wrap up this session. We finally get our seat change and have our camera up and running from seat 3, and we look down at pocket 10s. The low jack puts in a raise of 13, and I 3-bet to $35. Hoping to take it down or at least to isolate and see a flop in position with a really strong hand. It folds back around to the low jack, he calls, and we go heads up to a flop of queen 9-6. Obviously, I don't love the over card, but most of the time we're still going to have the best hand here. So after he checks, I go ahead and stick in a continuation bet of $35. The low jack sighs, and he puts in the call. Sometimes when people are vocal about saying like, oh, let's gamble, or they sigh heavily, sometimes it's real and sometimes they're just putting on an act. So I've got my spidey senses up in case he's just messing with us. Nevertheless, we're the only ones who are going to have pocket queens here. We still have aces and kings in our range. So more often than not, we're going to be ahead on this flop. The turn is the king of hearts. Again, I don't love the overcard, but it's good for our range. So when he checks, I'm just going to apply more pressure. I make it 100, and he ultimately folds. He's been a nice guy named Kong, so I go ahead and show Kong my pocket 10s. He nods, says he didn't put me on that hand, but that they were still good. We will take it, adding $70 more to our pile and moving on to the last hand of the night. One of the prettiest hands out there, Queen Jack suited. We get a hijack raise of $12, and sitting on the button, I could go either way with just calling or sticking in the raise. We're getting pretty close to wrapping things up. I want to make sure I book a win. So I'm going to play on the cautious side and just go ahead and put in the call, hoping to see a flop in position. That invites the small blind to come along as well, and we go to a flop of 8-7-7 rainbow. The small blind checks, and the hijack sticks in a C bet of $15. I don't think he's going to have 8s here. I don't think he's going to have 7s here. He's been on the more conservative side, and oftentimes players at 1-3 will just C-bet because they think that's what you're supposed to do when you raise pre-flop. So considering the board and considering his range, I stick in the raise for $50. The small blind snap folds. The hijack thinks about it for a while and puts in the call. Going to the turn of the king of spades. So on the positive side of things, my backdoor flush draw is now looking better, although this king is definitely a better card for him than it is for me. So considering that I'm in position, when he checks, I'm just going to go ahead and check it back and see what happens on the river, which comes in the 5 of spades. We get there on the flush, and when the hijack checks again, I really don't think he's got a full house. I don't think he's got me beat. So I bet $70 for value, and this time he pretty quickly calls. I turn over my flush, and it is good. I apologize for sucking out, and he says, what do you think I had? I think about it for a second and I say, I feel like you probably had something like a pocket pair, maybe pocket tens. He confirms that's exactly what he had. We get lucky with the suck out and we head to the cashier, racking $1,021 worth of chips for a profit of $721. Great start to Seattle poker. We played for about 9 hours, made just under $1,000. I wish I could do that every day at work, especially with it being tax-free. Don't tell the IRS. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this in the comments. First, card rooms can only have 15 tables, so that really limits the availability of certain games. I think there were 6 tables at 1-3 and 2 at 3-5. So both nights I was able to play for a few hours before my name even got called at 3-5. By the time my name got called, I felt like I had a good enough read on the table to where I wanted to stay where I was. Another thing which didn't really come into play on either of these 2 sessions, there's a max bet of $300. So while they call it no limit, it's technically a spread limit game. So I could bet 300, you can still raise me another 300. My understanding is that there are a max of 3 raises per street. So technically 300, 300, 300, 300. So a max of $1,200 per person could go in per street. That's not going to happen very often at 1-3 or 3-5, but it does come into play once in a while. Another thing, I like this Fortune card room. They got really good deals on food and drinks. I got a salmon dinner with mashed potatoes, broccoli for $11, so that was cool. Another thing is that the high hand definitely factors into how you play the game. It's a variable that I think is helpful as long as you're aware that certain players are playing differently because of it. You're going to see people playing a wider range of hands pre-flop, and then they're going to be a lot more likely to fold if and when they're unlikely to hit their high hands. I'm curious to see how it impacts the 3-5 games. I'm also curious to learn what other card rooms are good in the area. For most of the people that I've spoken with, Fortune is the best card room in the Seattle area. Almost all of them are owned by Eric Person. So for those of you who have watched that epic rant between Phil Hellmuth and Eric Person, he's the owner of Maverick Gaming. So he owns most of the card rooms in the area. Anyway, we're off to a good start in Washington. Let's hope this keeps up. So please make sure that you like, comment, subscribe, and like I said, hit that bell icon so you get the notification of when these videos come out in the future. You can watch and I can keep putting out these videos and hopefully we can make some money for some pups. I'm Wes. Thanks for watching vlog 14 of Poker for Pound Pups. We'll see you next time and good luck out there to all of you.
Hey everybody, subscribe here to catch the latest episodes. Also, hit that like button and share these videos with anyone who might enjoy them. Doing that really helps the channel and its goal to support dog shelters, so thanks for watching Poker for Pound Pups, and have a great day.